Somebody loaded a convoy of cars, drove into a quiet neighborhood after dark, walked up a private driveway, hammered on a stranger's door, and announced into the intercom that Aubrey sent them. Aubrey. As in Aubrey Graham. As in Drake. And the house they were standing in front of, according to every single person holding a phone that night, belongs to Kendrick Lamar. That happened. Not in a lyric. Not in a video treatment. Not in a hypothetical cooked up in a group chat and never executed. That happened in a real driveway, in front of a real camera hidden in a real tree, inside the last 72 hours. And sit still for one more second, because that is only the first clip. There is a second one. And when you place those two pieces of footage side by side on a mental split screen, the entire Drake and Kendrick Lamar story you thought you were watching for 18 months turns over on its back and shows you a shape underneath that nobody with a brand deal to protect and nobody who needs access to either camp is willing to name out loud tonight. I am going to name it out loud tonight. Here is your immediate receipt, so you know I am not wasting your evening on a tease. In the first tape, one of these guys tilts his head up mid-stunt and spots a surveillance camera tucked into the branches of a tree at the edge of the property. You can watch the temperature in that driveway drop 40 degrees in 1 second, because that is the exact moment a group of grown men understand they are no longer content creators. They are exhibits. Before we go any further, tap the like button, hit subscribe if the algorithm dropped you here as a stranger tonight, and turn the bell on. Because this is going to move quick, and I do not want you halfway through the pattern realizing you never locked the door behind you. This channel breaks these situations down receipt by receipt, and Kendrick Lamar is sitting at the center of this one whether he volunteered for the seat or not. And I will make you a promise on the record. By the final minute of this breakdown, you are going to read the Drake and Kendrick Lamar era differently than you did when you clicked. Not slightly. Structurally. Once that switch flips, you cannot flip it back off. So let us lay the first tape out clean, because nobody in the commentary business has. They all clipped the funny 9 seconds and moved to the next upload. A cluster of young streamers running under a shared collective banner has spent months living off the crumbs of the Drake and Kendrick Lamar feud. Reaction uploads. Hot takes. Territorial chest thumping. And at some point in a room somewhere in Los Angeles, somebody at that table decided reaction content was no longer paying the bills, and the next escalation needed to be physical. Not a studio lobby. Not a venue loading dock. Not a red carpet rope line where a photograph is a reasonable request. They picked a residence. They picked the address where a human being sleeps. Where somebody pours cereal in the morning. Where on any ordinary Wednesday night the most dissected artist on the planet is probably sitting with a blank page trying to remember what silence sounds like. They looked at that address, said it out loud on a live microphone, and called it the location for the shoot. The footage that came out of that decision is a case study in what happens when internet delusion meets a doorbell camera. They pull up in a small caravan. Phones are rolling before a single car door opens because the recording is not a byproduct of the trip. The recording is the trip. Nobody is carrying flowers. Nobody is carrying a letter. Nobody is carrying a message from an actual person who actually knows Kendrick Lamar. What they are carrying is a bit, and the bit requires a specific front door as a prop. The first one walks up to the intercom, presses whatever button is available, and announces that he has arrived at the property to deliver a message. That is his framing. A message. And the substance of it, once he gets it out of his mouth, is that Kendrick Lamar allegedly put some kind of emotional stress on Drake during diss track season, and therefore this crew has driven out tonight to collect a symbolic debt on behalf of a multi-millionaire artist who has never heard any of their names and could not pick one of them out of a police lineup if his catalog depended on it. Sit inside the architecture of that framing, because it explains more about the parasocial economy than any think piece has in 2 years. These individuals genuinely believe they are ambassadors. They believe arriving unannounced at that residence, phone in one hand, knuckles on the door, constitutes a legitimate act of retaliation inside a disagreement where they hold zero equity, zero standing, and zero invitation. They believe the microphone in their hand converts a trespass into an assignment. The microphone does no such thing. The microphone is not a badge, not a warrant, not press credentials. It does not manufacture authority out of thin air. The only thing a microphone manufactures in that driveway is documentation, and documentation outlives every laugh recorded on that lawn by about 7 years, which is roughly how long a civil docket stays alive when somebody with real counsel decides to be thorough. Then the temperature climbs, because that is what happens when camera-carrying strangers stand in a stranger's yard watching each other for permission to go one click further. One of them starts pounding the door. Another shouts into the intercom in a voice engineered to carry through a wall. A third runs the tired routine where he pretends to be a delivery driver, then a courier with a package, then starts calling Kendrick Lamar by his government name, dragging each syllable out like he is trying to summon him through the wood grain. They know silence is death on camera. They know the recommendation engine rewards volume and escalation. So they manufacture both on another human being's porch, using somebody else's property as a soundstage. And then comes the detail that turns the whole tape into a punchline and a warning at the same time. One of them looks up, tilts his head, points at a small surveillance camera nested in the branches of a tree at the property line. A camera in a tree. Read that back slowly, because that single object carries two possibilities and both are catastrophic for the crew standing in that driveway. Possibility 1. This is not Kendrick Lamar's residence at all, and they are terrorizing an unrelated homeowner who is about to have the worst night of their adult life over a feud they may not know exists. Possibility 2. This is exactly the property they think it is, which means he anticipated this precise brand of foolishness long ago and hardened the perimeter accordingly. Either way, the tape is rolling. Faces are logged. And the legal exposure compounds with every additional second of footage they voluntarily generate against themselves. Let me pause here and be straight with you, because I am not in the business of selling speculation dressed up as verified fact. I cannot confirm on this channel that the address in that footage is Kendrick Lamar's actual private residence. I am not sitting in front of a county records terminal. I do not have a deed in my hand. What I can confirm without hesitation is that the people in that convoy believed it was his home. That belief is the load-bearing wall of the whole stunt. That belief is the product they were selling to their subscribers, to the recommendation engine, and to whichever corner of the timeline they were auditioning for. In a parasocial economy, belief is the currency. Whether it is factually accurate barely moves the needle, because the damage detonates the second the camera turns on and a location gets broadcast to strangers. Then the tape shifts gears in a way everybody watching should sit with for a full breath. A vehicle rolls onto the property. A figure steps out. And according to viewers running that footage back frame by frame, this individual appears attached to a private security operation. The energy in that group tightens instantly. Every ounce of door pounding, intercom shouting bravado compresses into something you can physically watch shrink on your screen. One of them mumbles into his own camera that he cannot run. Another is visibly rattled and stops narrating entirely. A third starts walking backwards without turning around, which is the specific body language of a man doing math in his head and realizing he grossly misread the room he walked into uninvited. And I have to name something here, because it applies whether the resident is Kendrick Lamar or a retired schoolteacher with a bad knee. You do not roll up on somebody's private home in this country, in this climate, in this decade, with a phone in your hand and your face on the lens, and reasonably expect the interaction to end with handshakes. That is not how the physics of American residential property work. There are people who own firearms. There are people who employ armed security. There are people who survived a home invasion and never recovered from the sound of a doorknob turning at the wrong hour. You do not know who is on the other side of that door. You do not know the medication they are on, the grief they are carrying, or the last threat that arrived in their mailbox. And when you gamble on that ignorance to harvest a 2-minute clip, the odds run against you on a long enough timeline. Now here is the moment in that tape that I had to run back twice, because it explains the psychology driving this entire operation better than any other frame in the footage. One of the streamers, mid-standoff, floats an idea to the rest of the group. He suggests that when the door finally opens, they should tell whoever is standing there that Aubrey sent them. Aubrey. That is Drake's government name. Aubrey Graham. These young men were fully prepared to invoke the legal name of one of the most powerful artists alive as the alleged sponsor of their late-night visit to Kendrick Lamar's alleged front door. Let me break down why that one sentence, above everything else on that tape, is catastrophic. If Drake did not send them, and I have not seen one shred of evidence suggesting he did, then they were seconds away from claiming to speak on behalf of a man whose legal team does not casually shrug off unauthorized representation. That is not a joke that dies on the driveway. That is a joke that gets printed, exhibited, and read aloud in a room with a court reporter in it. If Drake did send them, and again, I have zero evidence supporting that reading, then they were seconds away from implicating him in conduct a prosecutor could comfortably frame as harassment or trespass. There is no third door. Every version of that sentence is a disaster for somebody, and the man who proposed it should have kept it in the group chat. Because the instant it left his mouth on a live recording, it stopped being a thought and became a line item in a folder attorneys open at billable hours. But the deeper poison inside that idea is not legal. It is psychological. Those individuals believe dropping Drake's name transforms a random late-night trespass into an official errand. Sanctioned business. Soldiers on assignment from headquarters. That is the delusion in its purest form. And delusion is not a passive condition. Delusion is a motor. Delusion is an engine with a full tank. Delusion books the rental car. Delusion signs leases in neighborhoods it cannot afford. Delusion moves bodies across a city at 11 at night and points them at a driveway they had no business turning into. And Kendrick Lamar has now been conscripted into the center of somebody else's mental spiral without ever being handed a permission slip. Nobody asked him to become the involuntary landlord of a stranger's psychosis. That is not a role any artist auditions for. Now let me be honest about the larger dynamic, because I have tracked the Drake and Kendrick Lamar situation and every one of its side quests for months, and what I am looking at has stopped being a coincidence. It is a pattern. Not one incident. Not two. A shape. A repeating, recognizable shape. A specific category of stunt keeps emerging from one specific corner of the fandom, and the temperature keeps climbing week over week. Pull the camera back, look at the mosaic of the last 6 months, and something ugly assembles itself underneath all the engagement farming. It reads less like we love our artist and more like we need our artist to see us, and we will torch any boundary the culture puts in front of us to catch his eye for 1 second. That is the whole ballgame. The moment your motivation shifts from celebrating to being seen, there is no line you will not step over, because the line is not the obstacle. The line is the content. Let me read you a stack of community reactions to that doorstep clip and notice something structural as I go. The response was not split. It was not a coin flip. It was not defenders on one side and critics on the other. Every viewer, regardless of which side of the Drake and Kendrick Lamar aisle they normally sit on, landed in the same square, and that square reads indefensible. One viewer wrote that this is what happens when your favorite artist attracts a chronically online, unemployed teenage fan base with unlimited free time and zero supervision. Another wrote that these are supposedly the shooters Drake keeps referencing in his catalog, and here they are cosplaying as delivery drivers on a stranger's intercom at night. Another one wrote the forward classic. Plays stupid games, wins stupid prizes. Another wrote that if Kendrick Lamar supporters had run a stunt half as reckless, the timeline would have assembled a full mob inside the hour, but when the energy travels the other direction, the room discovers its inside voice. Another wrote, imagine catching a police report for Drake of all people, a man who would not spare you a nod at a stoplight. Another wrote that the same fan base that spends every waking hour calling other people corny just delivered the corniest artifact of the year. And another one wrote what I thought was the sharpest diagnosis in the entire comment section. This is what parasocial delusion looks like the exact moment it graduates from a comment box to a camera. Unanimity like that is rare in a culture war this heated. Unanimity is the tell. When neutrals, opposition loyalists, and casuals who never engaged with a single bar of this feud all arrive at the same verdict inside the same hour, that is the culture speaking with one voice, and it means a line got crossed that should have stayed uncrossed. There is no counter-narrative in circulation. No organized defense being drafted. Nobody workshopping a spin. Even people who do not care about Kendrick Lamar or Drake in any direction are looking at that footage and saying, no, that is too far. And when the crowd that never purchased his records and never streamed a Drake project front to back lands on the same verdict as the day one loyalists, that is not opinion anymore. That is the culture writing something down in permanent ink. All right. Now let me set up the second clip, because this is the exact point where the pattern stops being an anecdote and becomes a diagnosis. Rewind a couple of years. Maybe closer to 3, depending how you count. Some of you already know precisely which night I am about to reference. There was an incident outside Drake's own compound in Toronto. A security guard was shot. It was a serious, genuinely frightening night that forced the culture to stop and re-examine how far this thing had already traveled while everybody was busy laughing at the artwork. And to this day, there is no publicly verified, court-adjudicated answer about who was ultimately responsible or exactly why it happened. I am not going to fill that gap with fan fiction. But the aftermath cast a shadow over every conversation that followed. At the time, the immediate finger-pointing traveled in one direction, and that direction was Kendrick Lamar's side of the fence. There was speculation. There was blame. There was heat aimed at anybody perceived to be even loosely aligned with him in that city. Whether that blame was fair or wildly unfair is not the case I am relitigating tonight. The point to hold in your head is this. The direction of the blame got set. It got carved into the culture's memory as the default reading. And now, watching this current wave of stunts roll in, I cannot stop noticing that the direction of the aggression has completely reversed since that night, and the coverage has not caught up. The doorstep caravans. The sidewalk confrontations over song selection. The public assaults over portable speakers. The on-camera government name summoning. Every one of those vectors now points the other way, and the commentary industry is still running the old map. Which brings me to the second tape. This one is not a prank gone sideways. This is real-world aggression in broad daylight against a total stranger on a busy public sidewalk. And the sole trigger is that a Kendrick Lamar record was playing out loud from a portable speaker within earshot of the wrong group of people. Let me paint the scene clean. Toronto. Big crowd. Public sidewalk. Ordinary evening. A citizen is walking with a portable speaker playing music at a normal volume. That is the entire offense. That is the whole indictment. A group rolls up on him and starts shouting. They demand the music be shut off immediately. They stack on threats. They start invoking territorial ownership of the block, then the city, then the entire country if you let them keep talking. Do not play Kendrick Lamar here. Do not play him around us. Do not play him in these streets. Do not play him within earshot of anybody who claims this postal code. Then they escalate. They snatch the speaker out of his hands and fling it across the sidewalk. And when the man bends down to retrieve his own paid-for property, they attack him. Multiple attackers. One target. Daylight. Over a song. Sit with the absurdity of that before we move another inch. We have arrived at a point in this cycle where a private citizen cannot play a Kendrick Lamar record on his own speaker during his own evening walk without being physically assaulted by strangers who read his audio preferences as a personal insult. That is not a beef. That is not a feud. That is not a rap battle. That is a public safety issue. That is a slow-motion escalation that started as clever bars in a recording booth and landed on somebody's ribs on a Toronto sidewalk. And the reason it landed there, in my honest assessment, is that for months certain influencers, certain streamers, certain podcast hosts have been signaling through jokes, through territorial claims, through nickname warfare, and through relentless framing that this brand of aggression is acceptable, that it is part of the show, that it is a fun extension of the beef, that it is simply the price of admission for enjoying music during a hot moment. I have to name that, because if I do not name it on this platform, I am participating in it. This was never part of the game. A disagreement between two artists operating at the altitude of Drake and Kendrick Lamar is a spectator sport. It is not a draft notice. It is not a call to arms. It is not a hunting license for civilians who picked the wrong track on a Saturday evening. And every commentator who has been quietly laundering that energy into the mainstream for clicks needs to take a long, unflattering look at what they have been platforming, because the receipts are on the table and the pattern is undeniable. Somewhere along the way, the fun stopped being fun. The joke stopped being a joke. And every one of us is now standing inside the consequences. Let me read some of the reactions to the Toronto clip, because just like the doorstep footage, the response came back completely one-sided. One viewer wrote that the same city, which had an entire stadium chanting Kendrick Lamar records back at Drake last year, is now the same city where you can get jumped on a sidewalk for playing those exact records out loud, and they asked the room to make that make sense. Another wrote the aggressor sounded like a cornball rehearsing a tough guy audition tape on the easiest target he could find. Another wrote that Drake caught an entire stadium of his own hometown singing Not Like Us back at him last summer, and this sidewalk assault is the sequel nobody requested. Another pointed out that the aggressor did not even sound convinced by his own voice, that he sounded like a man reading cue cards handed to him off camera. Another wrote that the same fan base that runs around calling other people goofy just filmed the goofiest artifact on the internet this month. Another wrote the line I want underlined in permanent marker. This is not fandom. This is a personality disorder wearing a jersey. Another wrote, imagine assaulting a stranger over an artist who does not know you exist and who would tell you personally to stop if he ever found out your name. And another wrote the sentence I keep circling back to. Neither Kendrick Lamar nor Drake sent these people. This is cowards using a rap beef as cover for being aggressive in public. Unanimous again. Nobody drafting a defense. Nobody spinning it. Every commenter, regardless of loyalty, landed on the same conclusion inside the same window. This is out of pocket. This is beyond corny. This is dangerous. And somebody catches a serious injury or worse if the current velocity holds. Let me be crystal clear about where I personally sit, because I already know how the comment section likes to twist a man's words. I do not co-sign violence. I do not co-sign confrontations over music. I do not want to see anybody catch hands over a song. I do not want anybody attacked for playing a Kendrick Lamar record, a Drake record, a J. Cole record, or a Whitney Houston record. That is my line, and I will repeat it as many times as this conversation requires. But I am not naive either. I have lived in the real world long enough to know that when you keep pushing an escalation ladder in one direction, week after week, eventually somebody at the top of that ladder pushes back. And when they push back, the return is almost never proportional to the trigger. That is the tragedy sitting inside this pattern. The first few incidents look silly. The middle ones look concerning. And the final one, the incident that breaks out of the culture blogs and lands on national news, is the one none of us are prepared for. By the time it arrives, not a single earlier stunt can be walked back, deleted, or apologized away. That is why I keep telling you people are dancing on live wires. And when I say that, I do not only mean around Kendrick Lamar. I mean around any random citizen whose private evening you decide to convert into content. You do not know that person. You do not know their history. You do not know their permit status, their partner, or their pre-existing reason to be on edge at 11 at night. You do not know. And when you gamble on not knowing to harvest a phone recording, the odds are not on your side. Now zoom the lens back onto Kendrick Lamar for a second, because the framing on him inside these stunts has been wrong from the very first frame. Kendrick Lamar is not a rookie. He is not a mid-tier act scrapping for a placement. He is not a niche curiosity for the blog crowd. Kendrick Lamar is a Pulitzer Prize winner, a Super Bowl halftime headliner, and a generation-defining figure whose catalog is currently being taught inside actual university lecture halls by actual tenured faculty. When you volunteer yourself onto his alleged property as a bit, as a stunt, as a piece of engagement bait, you have signed up for a consequence pool that a streamer with a few thousand subscribers cannot afford to pay out of. He has legal counsel on retainer. He has private security. He has a label footprint that moves faster than any local court docket. And he has a long, documented history of not entertaining foolishness anywhere near his personal space. The risk-to-reward math on this stunt is upside down before the car doors even shut. Here is the part that gets further under my skin the longer I sit with it. These individuals believe they are being bold. They believe they are being clever. They believe they just executed the content coup of the season and the numbers are about to validate them. Bold is not the word for what happened in that driveway. Bold is confronting somebody your own size on equal footing in daylight with your legal name attached and nowhere to hide. What those streamers did is the structural opposite. They farmed attention by weaponizing a stranger's peace, hid inside the numerical safety of a group, and bragged about it after retreating to a safe distance. That is not bravery. That is a costume. That is a character somebody read about online and decided to try on for one evening. And costumes do not stop bullets. Costumes do not stop lawsuits. Costumes come off in the morning, and the human being underneath still has to walk into a job, still has to answer a summons, still has to sit across a dinner table from a family member who watched the clip and can no longer look him in the eye. So what happens next? That is the real question, and none of the surrounding coverage is asking it plainly. The pattern is escalating. The stunts are bolder. The confrontations are more physical. The doorstep visits are getting closer to the actual door. The sidewalk incidents are getting closer to actual assault charges. And nobody with a real platform is pumping the brakes. The influencers who reposted the doorstep clip laughed and rolled straight into the next topic. The streamers who covered the Toronto footage cut it into a highlight reel and monetized it before the man's bruises set. Comment sections are full of outrage, sure, but outrage does not stop the next clip from being filmed. Outrage does not stop the next escalation from getting greenlit in a group chat at 2 in the morning by people who genuinely believe they are on assignment. Now let me be fair for a beat, because I do not want anybody twisting this into something it is not. Kendrick Lamar supporters are not perfect either. Every fandom carries an obsessive corner. Every fandom carries a chronically online contingent. Every fandom carries a handful of genuinely unhinged extremists who make the rest of the group look bad on a random Tuesday. His side has them. Drake supporters have them. Nicki Minaj supporters have them. J. Cole supporters have them. Every artist at scale attracts a certain species of obsessive attachment, and I have been on the record about that dynamic for years. But what I am watching right now, from this one specific corner of the culture, has a distinct flavor. It has a signature texture. It has a specific move set that separates it from ordinary fandom passion. And Kendrick Lamar keeps showing up as the recurring target, which is exactly why his name has to keep sitting inside every honest breakdown of what is happening out here. So what breaks the cycle? That is the question I keep returning to after the camera stops and the lights go down and I am scrolling the same footage for the 4th time. I will tell you what I believe breaks it. I believe this cycle only breaks when somebody higher up the food chain steps to a microphone and says the word enough. I believe it breaks when an artist with genuine leverage in this culture goes on camera, on his own platform, in his own voice, and says out loud, "Leave my supporters out of this. Do not roll up on Kendrick Lamar's property. Do not jump strangers on my behalf. Do not treat any of this music as a weapon." That is the one voice left with the range to lower the temperature. Because these streamers are not listening to me. They are not listening to the comment section. They are not listening to their own families. But they might listen to the artists they claim to be defending in every clip they upload. That is the last lever this culture has not pulled. And even that lever is not a guarantee, which is the genuinely unsettling part. When artists finally do speak up and publicly distance themselves from the worst behavior of their fan base, the parasocial contingent does not always accept the message. Sometimes they double down. Sometimes they read the disavowal as proof the artist is being silenced by the industry. Sometimes they invent an alternate story where he is speaking under duress, forced by handlers to renounce his most loyal soldiers against his will. That is how deep the delusion runs at this stage. That is how far the psychology has drifted from the actual world. Let me bring this back to the practical, because there are real takeaways inside these 2 clips for everybody who consumes and reshares this culture with every click. Takeaway 1. Do not roll up on anybody's residence. Not for a joke. Not for a bit. Not for a clip. Not for a check. Not for clout. Not for the algorithm. Not for Kendrick Lamar. Not for Drake. Not for anybody breathing. If your content pipeline requires trespassing on a stranger's driveway to survive another week, that pipeline is structurally broken and you need a new one. There are 1,000 ways to make compelling content that do not involve knocking on doors nobody invited you to. Takeaway 2. Do not put your hands on a stranger over a song. Not in Toronto. Not in Atlanta. Not in New York. Not in London. Not on any block on any continent. A song is a song. A speaker is a speaker. If somebody's music irritates you in public, walk the other direction, put your own headphones in, cross the street like a functional adult. You do not get to regulate what a stranger listens to on his own device. That is not your lane. That is not your jurisdiction. And the second your hands go on another person over a track selection, you have crossed out of fandom and into a courtroom with your name on the docket. Takeaway 3. If you have a platform of any size, think twice before you laugh at these clips on your channel. Think twice before you boost them. Think twice before you convert somebody else's trespass into your own thumbnail revenue. Because every share, every laugh, every cosign is a deposit into the escalation ladder, and that ladder is not a metaphor. It is a real staircase with real steps. Every step is steeper. Every step is more expensive. And every step carries this culture closer to an incident none of us will be able to unsee once it plays on the evening news. I want to address something head-on before I close this out, because I already know exactly which counterargument is going to land in my comment section within the hour. I know some of you are going to say I am carrying water for Kendrick Lamar. I know some of you are going to say my tone would be different if these incidents ran the other direction. Let me answer that on the record right now, so nobody can misquote me later. If this exact footage, the doorstep caravan and the sidewalk assault over a speaker, had come from his supporters and been aimed at Drake's supporters, I would be sitting in this same chair, under this same lighting, saying these same words in this same order. I would be calling it corny. I would be calling it dangerous. I would be pointing at the same escalating pattern. Because the pattern is the problem. Not the jersey. Not the flag. Not the artist. Not the city. The pattern itself. And that is really the whole point of this breakdown, because in the end none of this is actually about Kendrick Lamar. None of this is actually about Drake. None of this is actually about hip-hop as a genre or a chart or a streaming number. This is about a wider phenomenon in which obsessive online communities lose their grip on reality, forget the boundary between a screen and a street, and start operating as though the internet is an actual battlefield with actual life or death stakes attached to a song selection. And when that imaginary battlefield spills into the physical world, and it always spills eventually, the people who absorb the impact are almost never the artists. The artists are on private jets. The artists have security details, attorneys on speed dial, gated perimeters, and cameras hidden in trees. The people who absorb the impact are ordinary civilians. Somebody's cousin. Somebody's brother. Somebody's son. Somebody's neighbor. The bystander who happened to press play on the wrong track on the wrong sidewalk on the wrong evening. That is the actual cost. Not the streamers filming it. Not the commentators laughing at it. Not Kendrick Lamar in a recording booth. Not Drake in a private studio. The bystander. Always the bystander. And once that bystander ends up on a hospital gurney with a case number attached to his name, this entire culture is going to pretend it did not see it coming. When the truth is that every honest observer has been watching this arrow point in the same direction for months. So take this for what it is. A warning. A mirror. An invitation to sit with the pattern and figure out where you personally stand inside it. Are you laughing when these clips land on your timeline? Are you forwarding them into your group chat before you finish watching? Are you rooting for one side to embarrass the other on public video? Or are you one of the ones ready to say out loud, enough, this is not the culture I signed up for? Because the answer to that question shapes the next 12 months of this era, more than any diss track Drake or Kendrick Lamar could possibly release. And if the trend line I described tonight holds its speed, those 12 months include at least one incident none of us are ready for. None of us. Screenshot this. Come back to it in a year. I will still be right here. All right, family. I laid the pattern out for the record. Now I want to hear from you, because this does not get solved by one man talking into one camera in a dark room. Drop a comment below and tell me straight. Are you seeing what I am seeing? Do you agree a specific corner of this fandom crossed a line that cannot be walked back? Or do you think I am off base and this is standard internet noise that dissolves by next weekend? I read the comments. I answer as many as I can. Let us have this conversation in public until the culture actually shifts. One last thing before I close the tab tonight. If you made it this far, we vibe. That means you rock with the way I break these situations down piece by piece, receipt by receipt, without the industry filter. So the small ask on my end. Tap the like button. Subscribe if you have not already. Turn notifications on so you do not miss the next drop. I have a full slate coming this week, including a breakdown of the industry mechanics that made the Drake and Kendrick Lamar feud commercially possible in the first place, plus a deep dive into the parasocial economy that keeps manufacturing footage exactly like the two clips we picked apart tonight. You want to be in the room for both. That is the read. That is the story. That is the pattern in full color, and it is a pattern every one of us has a role in either feeding or starving. Stay sharp out there. Do not knock on strange doors. Do not put your hands on strangers over songs. And do not, under any circumstances, let a rap beef between two grown millionaires turn you into a headline. I will see you on the next one.